Okay, I'll be there. Give me a moment. All right. And I think we're here. As it is, I have no idea, as usual, what's going on with any of this stuff with the thingamajig itself, but I won't worry about it because it's going to be an ongoing thing. I had somebody wrote me a letter and or an email or whatever you want to call it in these days, and said that she was not able to comment. And because I've always had my comments set on public, meaning you don't have to be on my friends list to comment, I suspect that what that is a mistake on my part, where I assumed that carried over to accessing Facebook from a different platform, or perhaps from accessing Facebook Live instead of just doing the regular, text and comments and all that stuff. So I just found out what I have to do to find out if that's true or not. Unfortunately, I didn't find out in time to fix it for this one. So my apologies for the kind person who sent me the note. And I will try and get it solved. I certainly don't want to, although probably most of the people that are listening in are on my Facebook friends list, that is by no means something that I want to have going on and preventing anybody else from commenting, because I've always had my comments open to the public because I have nothing to hide. Anyway, hi, this is Tad. It is Sunday morning, very early, 1:02 in the morning, my time. That is Pacific Tiger Town time. And I am going to be reading, as usual, tonight from, we're currently reading Otherland, the first volume, City of Golden Shadow. Before I do that, I'm trying to think if there's anything super important I have to talk about. Nah, it's been a interesting week. I did get Into the Narrow Dark off my desk and sent it off to my publishers, although it's not done because there's still going to be processes, including copy editing and then reading the proofs. So I still have to read the whole thing through 2 more times and make corrections, but there'll be a while before all that happens. But you try to make very small corrections by the time you're getting to proofreading, especially copy editing, not so much. But I certainly am hoping I won't be doing much in the way of adding or changing anything. So that's the main news. Into the Narrow Dark off. I'm just getting back to work on Navigator's Children, the last volume. What else? God, I don't know. It was a rough week. Not because anybody in the family suffered anything tragic or anything like that. So I don't mean to make it sound worrisome. Just had a rough week myself, slotting between various medications and prescriptions running off and stuff, and affected sleep patterns and various other things. So if I suddenly, happen to, in the middle of the broadcast, then you'll understand. But other than that, what else? Got the dog out for a walk today. It's definitely December. I finally realized I was sitting there the other day. Honest to God, this is exactly how things go for me. And Deborah's birthday is coming up in now it's about 2 weeks. But I was sitting there thinking, okay, so, understanding that there's shipment problems and things like that, and, et cetera, et cetera. Anything I'm going to order online for Deb, I should order in the next couple of days because it's already the 27th or 28th of November or whatever it was. And so as I'm thinking that, I said, I should just double check. And I opened up the calendar app or something. It says December 3rd. And I went, oh my God, I've lost another week. Oh, help me. This is one of the reasons why I'm just an absolute wreck also at this time of the year is, all the holidays confusion and stuff and things. And one of our young people said to me, we getting a tree? And, I said, hey, if we get a tree before Christmas Eve, it's a win, So just, we'll take it one step at a time, let's make sure we get the other stuff done that's already on the list. I'm not kidding, I mean, back when I was a kid, we used to get the tree like, a month early and even into, our kids being small, we would get our Christmas tree at least 2-3 weeks ahead of time, and as things have gone on, I don't know whether it's because it's just Deb and I running our business, and etc. And also having 4 young people in the house that have their own needs and things. It's getting tighter every year. We literally got our tree on Christmas Eve last year. Fortunately, we only wanted to get a smallish one, in part because it was Christmas Eve. But I'll tell you, even when you're willing to take a small tree when you go out shopping on Christmas Eve, you are definitely picking through the bones of Christmas almost past. There's no doubt about it. We finally found a pretty nice little tree last time, but it was not easy. So anyway, I don't know why I'm babbling about that, except just to say it's been another hectic week. And we've got asbestos in our drywall. So, hey, big fun. Which is not just going to mean, taking out a couple of panels. It's going to mean rehabbing and basically remodeling an entire thing. So, by the way, my wife is always saying, oh, honey, they'll, you'll be famous someday. You'll probably be dead, but you'll be, suitably famous someday. And, and so any of the people who are in charge of when people get famous after they're dead, if there's any of you listening out there, or if any of you like your aunt, is a when people get famous after they're dead advocate of some kind. I don't need to get famous, but if there's more money coming after I'm dead, I wouldn't mind having it now. So send it along. Okay. God, what a life. What a day, what a week, what a year, what a life. I am going to now check in on who has come to join me today, and then we're going to start reading. We've got our first Thargor chapter to start with, which is always one of the entertaining parts, I think, of Otherland. Before I start, I'll tell you, well, actually, somewhere probably at the end of the broadcast tonight, I'll tell you something about that. But anyway, so let me check in and see who's here waiting, and before they obliterate all my comments. By the way, yeah, that goes, the things I've been complaining about with the comments, I had already set the comments ones to just basically have them be in order and not picked out for most relevant, or which is rubbish. How would Facebook know what's the most relevant comment anyway? All somebody has to do is put riot or urgent in it or whatever, no matter what the context, and all of a sudden that becomes relevant or something. I don't know, it's crap. But I am going to check in and see who is, and I should be able to fix some of that comment stuff just when I can find some time to do so. Anyway, first on the list here is Ilva. Hello, my dear. Good to see you. So, last one to be beta read. Oh my God, hun, I don't know. It's going to be months still. I mean, theoretically, I'm supposed to deliver it in February. I'm having a conversation because Ilva, the commenter who I'm responding to, as you will find if you go look in any of the new series of Ostenard books. Ilva and several other people, Ron and Jeremy and Angela are the four main ones, are all people who are doing reading for me, helping me make sure that my continuity is up to snuff, etc. So anyway, Ilva, I'm supposed to be turning the whole book in February. The chances that that's going to happen are commensurate with that of the people who will make me famous after I'm dead sending me my money now. Vegas would have those basically as even, the same kind of odds, which are very small. But I will let you know when I have a better idea what's going on. So anyway, good to see you, sweetie. Welcome aboard. Ronnie, hello, good to see you. And Holger, kind regards back to you in Val d'Isère. And we are about to set out on the story train. So yeah, hang in there. Kristen, hello, good to see you. Chris, good to see you too, and a pleasure as always. Did I tell you how frightening it is to me that now every time I access the Facebook app on my television, one of the first things that pops up at me is an entire row of my face, and how horrifying that is? Because of course, since Chris has been putting these up on YouTube as the Chris Fab channel, that's one of the things that's they made that connection somehow, that somebody named Tad Williams might be interested in Tad Williams, I guess. So YouTube has now got me on Chris's, that's one of the things they put up in my recommended feed. But it's horrifying because, they also come up in little rows where you see like many different broadcasts of that particular interest of yours, So like whether it's terrariums or rock and roll music or, history or any of the other things that my weirdo things that I'm interested in. And one of them is now Tad Williams, which, trust me, I'm only interested in so much as I have to be to keep it alive, to keep that alive, myself meaning. So every time it comes up, it's not just me, that's horrifying enough, but there's like 6 of me stretched across, all doing different things, because of course they're just screen grabs, they're random, or at least they're random in terms of they're not picked out to be nice pictures, I don't think, anyway. Or maybe it's just that, at this stage of my life, there is no such thing as a nice picture. But it's truly horrifying to be like, looking carefully at all the things as they're going past and going like, oh, yeah, maybe I'll check that one out later. That's, that sounds like that might be cool. Oh, yeah, okay. Something about ancient Carthage. Yeah, great. Okay. Yeah, I'm very interested in the Melkart Empire and blah, blah, blah. And I'm going down and there's like 6 pictures of me. And it's just, God, it's like getting a toothpick in the eyeball. Anyway, where was I? Yeah, so Chris, but thank you for putting those up. That is not a complaint about the fact of you being so kind as to make those available for those poor benighted souls who might like to watch more Tad. It's just that it personally is woeful to me that Facebook keeps giving them back to me. Like I want to see more pictures of myself. Anyway, Maria Jose, good to see you. A pleasure. Julian, good to see you too. Very nice. And say hello to everybody in Kassel. I already said hello to Ilva, who's definitely one of the people in Kassel. But say hello to any others for me. Dirk, hello and good morning to you too. Alan, nice to see you. Petra, hello. Okay, so you and Christina are both there. Good. I'm glad to hear it. In Berlin, in snowy Berlin. It's not snowy here. Of course, it's California, and you have to go up into the high mountains to get any snow at all, really, even in the middle of winter. But it has decidedly taken a turn into brisk. It's like it's cold. Because we normally during the day, we leave the doors open all day. We have sliding glass doors and we have screens on the sliding glass doors that way early on the dogs busted through. And but they still fill the door, the sliding door. So we just left them on there. They just, those are they're little doggy doors now. If we have the screens open, the dogs can go in and out, just brush the screen out of the way because it's no longer fitting in the frame down at the bottom. Anyway, but the reason I'm mentioning this is because, we tend to leave them open. And I suddenly realized, we've gotten to that time of the year where we cannot leave the doors open all day because it's just too flippin' cold. And but no, it ain't like it is in Berlin right now, or probably where many of you are. It's still California, so it's like just a little bit under 60 degrees or something in the daytime. Wouter, hello, good evening, and happy Sinterklaas to all of you Dutch listeners too. Mark, hello from London. Tell me what part of London you're in if I haven't asked you already, because you know I used to live in London and I love London. I miss it. It's my second home. And I would, if not for my family being all here in California, I would move back in a split instant because I do love London very much. Iris, good to see you. Jeremy, good Morgen. Es ist nur sehr spät in Amerika, ja? No, it's not particularly. What are we doing here? Kristen, I already said hello to. Wouter, I said hello to. Chris, I said hello to. Alan, I said hello to. You guys are now doubling up here. You're just talking to each other. Anybody else I have to say hello to? Saul. Hello, Saul. Good to see you too. Rosalba. There's somebody else I need to say hello to. And what else have we got? Anybody else I should say hello to before I vanish into the book? Already said hello to Dirk. And no, the Germans are all just having a conversation among themselves. So, I could just go home at this point. Nobody needs me. So, talk amongst yourselves? No, just kidding. I'm very glad that people are talking in the comments section and connecting with each other. It's one of the things I've always loved about what little small bit of fame and success that I have had is that, people have met each other and made friendships, lifelong friendships, through my work, which just feels really nifty to me. So, I'm always happy to see something like that. And of course, a lot of them have also become, lifelong friends of mine and Deb's as well, including several of the people who are regulars on these things. So anyway, that's where we're at. Anything else I wanted to mention? Not really. No, I'm just getting back into the fourth volume after having had to put it aside for a while. And of course, the main thing is that during the writing or the finishing up of the third volume, a whole bunch of stuff, I made changes on things because I went, that doesn't work as well as I thought it would. I'll do this. So now I have to not only write the last 200 pages of the first draft of the fourth book, but I have to go back also and reintegrate all the stuff that's changed in the third volume between the time I initially wrote it and wrote the fourth volume as it now stands. So it'll be complicated as hell. Don't be surprised if I just run away. Just run away from home. Go live in the woods somewhere and pretend that I don't know anything about fantasy novels. Okay, but I can't do that tonight because I have a job to do, and that job is to sit here and read to you. So that's what I'm going to do. And in fact, I'm going to start now. So we are reading, as most of you already know, from Otherland, Volume 1, also known as City of Golden Shadows, and we are reading from Chapter 4, The Shining Place. These books are really heavy. I should download a copy and put it on my phone or something. Anyway, as I have told everybody here, but of course I will remind some of you, every chapter begins with what I called a net feed, which is just supposed to give you an idea of the current conversation and news in the real world of this near future. So anyway, Chapter 4, The Shining Place. Netfeed, Arts, T.T. Jensen Retrospective begins. Visual, two-door metal flake sticky. That's a quote, that's an art piece. Visual, two-door metal flake sticky by Jensen. Voiceover. Based on car chase images from 20th century films, the staged, quote, sudden sculpture actions of fugitive San Francisco-based artist Tillamook Tallard Jensen require the presence of unwitting participants, including this legendary three-vehicle multiple fatality for which the reclusive Jensen is still being sought by authorities. Thargor sat and nursed his mead. A few of the inn's other patrons inspected him when they thought he wasn't looking, but quickly glanced away when he returned their stares. Dressed from throat to toes in black leather, with a necklace of razor-sharp merg teeth rattling on his chest, He didn't look like the sort of person they wanted to offend, even inadvertently. They were wiser than they knew. Not only was Thargor a mercenary swordsman, renowned throughout the Middle Country for his quick temper and quicker blade, but he was in an even fouler mood than usual. It had taken him a long time to find the wyvern's tail, and the person he had come to the inn to meet should have arrived when the last watch was called, quite some time ago. He had been forced to sit and wait, both his temper and his rune-scribed broadsword life reaper too large for this low-ceilinged public house. On top of everything else, the mead was thin and sour. He was inspecting the serpent's nest of white scars on the back of his broad fist when someone made a "just standing here" noise behind him. The fingers of his other hand tightened around Life Reaper's leather-wrapped hilt as he turned his head and fixed the nervous innkeeper with sharp, ice-blue eyes. "Pardon me, sir," the man stuttered. He was large, but fat. Thargor decided he would not need his rune sword even if the man intended violence. Not that his bulging eyes and pale cheeks suggested he did, and lifted his eyebrow in inquiry. He did not believe in wasting words. "Is the mead to your liking?" the innkeeper asked. "It's local, made right here in Silnor Valley." "It's horse piss, and I wouldn't want to meet the horse." The man laughed loudly and nervously. "No, of course not. Of course not." The laugh ended up rather like an hysterical giggle as he eyed Life Reaper in her long black scabbard. The thing is, sir, that there's someone outside. Said he wants to speak to you." "To me? He gave you my name, did he?" "No, sir. No. Why, I don't even know your name. Don't have the slightest idea of what your name is, and no interest in finding out." He paused for breath. "Although I'm sure it's a very respectable and euphonious name, sir." Thargor grimaced. "So, how do you know that he wants to speak to me? And what does he look like?" "Simple enough, sir. He said the big fella, begging your pardon, sir, the one dressed in black. Well, as you can see, sir, you're the biggest fellow here. And that's black you're dressed in, right enough. So, you can understand." And a raised hand stilled him. And, sir? What he looks like. Well, that I couldn't rightly tell you, sir. It was shadowy, it was. And he was wearing a hooded cloak. Probably a very respectable gentleman, I'm sure, but what he looks like, I couldn't tell you. Hooded cloak. Thank you, sir. Sorry to bother you." Thargor frowned as the innkeeper hurried away, scuttling rather impressively for a man of his bulk. Who could be outside? The wizard Drerajar? He was said to travel anonymously in this part of the Middle Country, and certainly had a bone or two to pick with Thargor. The affair of the onyx ship alone would have made them eternal enemies, and that had merely been their latest encounter. Or could it be the haunted rider, Kythlin, the banished elf prince? Although not a sworn enemy of Thargor's, the pale elf certainly would be looking to settle some scores after what had happened during their journey through Mythandor Valley. Who else might come looking for the swordsman in this unlikely place? Some local bravos he had offended? He had given those cutthroats a terrible thrashing back at the crossroads, but he doubted they would be ready for another go-round with him quite yet, even from ambush. There was nothing to do but go and see. As he rose, leather trews creaking, the patrons of the Wyvern's Tail studiously examined their cups, although two of the braver tavern wenches watched him pass with more than a little admiration. He tugged at Life Reaper's pommel to make sure she sat loosely in her scabbard, then walked to the door. The moon hung full and fat over the stable yard, painting the low roofs with buttery light. Thargor let the door fall shut behind him and stood, swaying a little, pretending to be drunk, but his hawk-like eyes were moving with the precision he had learned during 1,000 nights like this, nights of moonlight and magic and blood. A figure detached itself from the shadow of a tree and stepped forward. Thargor's fingers tightened on his sword hilt as he listened for any faint sound that might betray the position of other attackers. Thargor? The hooded figure stopped a few paces away. Hell, man, are you drunk? The mercenary's eyes narrowed. Pt.5, what are you up to? You were supposed to meet me an hour ago, and inside at that. Something happened. I was delayed, and when I arrived here, I could not go inside without drawing too much attention. Pt.5 swayed and not in feigned drunkenness. Thargor crossed the distance between them in 2 swift strides and caught the smaller man just before he collapsed. Hidden by the loose fabric, a dark stain. God, I'm having trouble reading tonight. Hidden by the loose fabric, a dark stain had spread across the front of Pt.5's robe. Gods, what happened to you? Pt.5 smiled weakly. Some bandits at the crossroads. Local bravos, I think. I killed 2 of them, but that was 4 too few. Thargor cursed. I met them yesterday. There were a dozen to begin with. I'm surprised that they are back to work so soon. A man has to earn his Imperials one way or the other. Pt.5 winced. It was a last stroke just as I broke away. I do not think it is mortal, but by the gods it hurts. Come then, we will get that tended to. We have other business this full moon night, and I need you beside me. But afterward we will do a magic trick, you and I. Pt.5 grimaced again as Thargor set him on his feet once more. A magic trick? Yes. We will go back to that crossroads and turn 4 into none. As it turned out, Pt.5's wound was long and bloody, but shallow. When it was bandaged and the little man had downed several cups of fortified wine to make up for the lost blood, he pronounced himself ready to ride. Since the hard physical work of the night's planned business was to be Thargor's, the mercenary took the thief at his word. While the moon was still rising in the sky, they left the wyvern's tail and its rustic patrons behind. The Silnor Valley was a long, narrow crevice that wound through the Catspine Mountains. As he and Pt.5 coaxed their horses up the slender mountain track out of the valley, Thargor reflected that a cat would have to be malnourished indeed to have a spine so bony and sharp-knobbed. What little life and noise there had been down in the valley seemed a lifetime away here in the heights. The woods were oppressively thick and silent. Were it not for the bright moonlight, the swordsman thought, it would have been like sitting at the bottom of a well. He had been in more frightening places, but few as broodingly unpleasant as this part of the cat's spine. The atmosphere seemed to be weighing on Pt.5 too. This is no place for a thief, he said. We relish darkness, but only to hide us as we make our way toward glittering things. And it is nice to have somewhere to spend the ill-gotten gains afterward and something to buy with them besides moss and stones. Thargor grinned. If we succeed, you may buy yourself a small city to play in, with all the toys and bright lights you wish. And if we do not succeed, I shall doubtless wish I were back facing the crossroads bandits again, wounded ribs and all. Doubtless. They rode on for a while in near silence, companioned only by the clip-clopping of their horses' hooves. The track wound up and around through twisted trees and standing stones of odd shape, upon whose surfaces the full moon picked out faint carvings, most of them incomprehensible, none pleasant to observe. They say that the old ones lived here once. Piflet's voice was determinedly casual. They do say that. Long ago, of course, ages ago. Not any longer. Thargor nodded, hiding a thin smile at Piflet's nervous tone. Of all the men, only Drera Jar and a few other sorcerers knew more of the old ones than Thargor, and no one was more feared by those atavistic deeps dwellers. If the ancient race still maintained some outpost here, let them show themselves. They bled like any other creature, albeit more slowly, and Thargor had sent swarms of their kind to hell already. Let them come. They were the least of his worries tonight. "Do you hear something?" asked Piflet. Thargor reined up, quieting his mount Blackwind with a strong hand. There was indeed a faint sound, a distant piping swirl that sounded a little like music, he grunted. "Perhaps you shall have the entertainment you were bemoaning earlier." Piflet's eyes were wide. "I do not wish to meet those musicians." "You may not have a choice." Thargor stared at the sky, then back at the narrow track. The otherworldly music faded again. "The trail to Masanek Kumb crosses here and leads in that direction." Piflet swallowed. "I knew I would have cause to regret accompanying you." Thargor laughed quietly. "If yon pipers are the worst we hear or see tonight, and we find the thing we seek, you will curse yourself for even hesitating." "If, swordsman, if." Thargor turned Blackwind to the right and led Piflet down the almost invisible trail into deeper shadow. Masanek Kumb lay beneath the moon like a great dark beast, an ill-omened veil heavy with its own solitude. The very trees of the mountainside stopped at its edge as though they would not touch it. The grass that grew upon the ground was short and sparse. The Kumb was a scar in the woodland, an empty place. Almost empty, Thargor noted. At its center, partially obscured by rising mist, stood the great ring of stones. Inside the ring lay the barrow. Piflet tilted his head. "The music has stopped again. Why is that?" "A man could go mad trying to make sense of such things." Thargor dismounted and looped Blackwind's reins around a tree branch. The charger had already turned skittish, despite a life spent treading paths no other horses knew. No point dragging him down closer to the place's center. "A man could go equally mad trying to see the sense in this." Piflet stared at the tall stones and shivered. "Defiling graves is a bad business, Thargor. Defiling the grave of an infamous sorceress seems to refute good sense entirely." Thargor unsheathed Life Reaper. The runes glimmered silver blue in the moon's cool light. "Zalitza Thal would have liked you much when she lived, little thief. I'm told she kept a stable of small and well-made fellows like yourself. Why should she change her ways simply because she is dead?" "Do not joke. Betrothed to Zalitza Thal was a byword for a bad bargain. A few days of maddening bliss followed by years of hideous agony." The thief's eyes narrowed. "In any case, it is not me she will be meeting. If you have changed your mind, well and good, but I am not going inside in your place." Thargor smirked. "I have not changed my mind. I but jested with you. I thought you rather pale, but perhaps it is the moonlight. Did you bring the scroll of Nanthior?" "I did." Pithlet rooted in his saddlebag and produced the object, a thick furl of curled hide. Thargor thought he could guess what sort of hide it might be. I nearly wound up in the tusky jaws of a werehog getting it, Pithlet added. Remember, you promised that nothing would happen to it. I have a buyer waiting. Nothing will happen to the scroll. Thargor took it in his hand, faintly but invisibly disturbed by the way the script seemed to writhe against his skin. Now follow me. We will keep you well away from danger. Well away from danger would mean out of these mountains altogether, complained Pithlet, but fell into step beside him. The mist surrounded them like a crowd of importuning beggars, pawing at their legs with cold tendrils. The great stone circle loomed before them, casting broad shadows on the moonlit fog. Is any magical artifact worth such risk? Pithlet wondered quietly. What can the mask of Zalisa be worth to you, who are no sorcerer? Exactly what it is worth to the sorcerer who hired me to steal it, Thargor replied. 50 diamonds of imperial weight. 50? By the gods! Yes, now shut your mouth. Even as Thargor spoke, the strange music came to them again across the wind, a haunting, discordant skirl of pipes. Pithlet's eyes bulged, but he held his tongue. The pair strode forward between the nearest pair of standing stones, ignoring the symbols carved there, and stopped at the base of the great barrow. The swordsman caught the thief's eyes once more, reinforcing the order of silence, then bent and put Life Reaper to work as though it were only a common farm tool. Soon Thargor had hacked away a wide stretch of turf. As he began to unpile the wall of stones that lay behind it, a whiff of decay and strange spices rose from the opening. Up on the hill, the horses nickered worriedly. When he had cleared a hole big enough to accommodate his wide shoulders, Thargor waved for his companion to hand him the scroll of Nanthior. As he unrolled it and whispered the words the sorcerer had taught him, words he had memorized but whose meaning he did not know, the painted symbols turned a gleaming red. At the same moment, a dim vermilion light was kindled in the depths of the barrow. When it died and the glowing runes had also faded, Thargor furled the scroll and gave it back to Pithlet. He took out his flints and lit the brand he had brought with him. There had been no need for a torch beneath the bright moon. Then eased himself down into the hole he had opened in Zalisa Thal's tomb. His last sight of Pithlet was of the nervous thief's silhouette limned by moonlight. The first sight of the barrow's interior was both daunting and reassuring. At the far end of the chamber in which he stood, another hole, this one in the shape of an oddly angled door, led down into further darkness. The great mound was only the antechamber for a far larger excavation, but Thargor had expected nothing else. His sorcerer client's ancient book had described the place where Zalisa Thal had immured herself before lying down to die. Let me try that one again. His sorcerer client's ancient book had described the place where Zalisa Thal had immured herself before lying down to die as a labyrinth. He lifted a small sack from his belt and spilled its contents into his palm. Glow seeds, each one a small mote of light in this dark place, would serve to mark his path so that he would not wander below the ground forever. Thargor was among the bravest of men, but when the day of his death came, he wished it to be beneath open sky. His father, who had lived a life of near slavery in the iron mines of Borikar, had died in a tunnel collapse. It was a fearful and unmanly way to go. As he pushed through the damp white roots that dangled from the ceiling, moving toward the door at the chamber's far end, he saw something strange and unexpected. A few paces to the right of the dark door, something was flickering like a low fire, although it cast no light on the earthen walls. As Thargor watched, it flared into full radiance and became a hole in the air that seeped yellow light. He snarled and lifted Life Reaper, wondering if some magical spell had been laid here to trick him. But his blade did not shimmer in his fist, as she did in the presence of sorcery, and the barrow smelled of nothing but damp soil and the faint odor of mummification, neither unexpected in a burial mound. He paused, muscles tensed to iron hardness, and waited for some demon or wizard to step through this magical door. When nothing emerged, he moved to the shining place and tested the opening with his hand. It gave off no heat, only light. After looking around the antechamber once more just to be careful, Thargor had not survived so many near-fatal adventures through carelessness, he leaned forward until he could gaze into the bright portal. Thargor gasped in disbelief. Long moments passed. He did not move, nor did he show any sign of life when Pithlet poked his head through the entrance hole and called to him, quietly at first, but then with increasing volume and urgency. The swordsman seemed to have turned to stone, a leather-clad stalagmite. "Thargor!" Pithlet was shouting now, but his companion gave no sign of hearing. "The music is playing again! Thargor!" A moment later, the thief became even more alarmed. "There's something coming into the chamber! The tomb's guardian! Thargor!" The mercenary pulled himself back from the golden light, swaying as though wakened from a deep sleep. Then, with Pithlet watching in stunned horror, he turned to face the desiccated corpse of what had been some great warrior shambling out of the darkened door at the chamber's far end. Thargor's movements were slow and dreamy. He had barely raised Life Reaper when the armor-clad mummy brought its rusted battle-axe down on his head, splitting his skull to the first knob of his spine. Thargor fumbled in gray emptiness, Pithlet's astonished cries still echoing in his memory. His own astonishment was no less. "I'm dead! I'm dead! How can I be dead?" It was beyond belief. "That was a lich! A stupid, sniveling lich! I've killed thousands of them. How can I get toasted by something as fringe as that?" He searched wildly for a moment as the gray nothing washed over him, but there were no solutions, nothing to be done. The damage was too great. He exited and was Orlando Gardner once more. Orlando pulled out his jack and sat up. He was so astounded by the turn of events that his hands moved in empty air for long moments before he unseeingly located and then absently punched into shape the pillows that cushioned his head, then reconfigured his bed so he could sit up. A cold sweat had purled on his skin. His neck ached from being in one position too long. His head hurt, too, and the glare of midday through his bedroom window wasn't helping. He rasped a command and turned the window into a blank wall again. He needed to think. Thargor is dead? It was so shocking he found it hard to consider anything else, although there were many things to think about. He had made Thargor. He had made himself Thargor, with the labor of 4 long, obsessive years. He had survived everything, developing a facility that was the envy of players everywhere on the net. He was the most famous character in the Middle Country game, recruited for every battle, first choice for every important task. Now Thargor was dead, his skull crushed by a ridiculous low-level irritant. A lich, for God's sake! The damned things were scattered around every dungeon and tomb in the sim world, cheap and ubiquitous as candy wrappers. Orlando took a squeeze bottle from his bedside and drank. He felt feverish. His head throbbed as though the Tomb Guardian's axe had truly struck him. Everything had happened with such boggling abruptness. That gleaming hole, that shining golden whatever it was, that had been something bigger, stranger by far than anything else in the adventure, in any adventure. Either one of his rivals had set the trap to end all traps, or something beyond his understanding had occurred. He had seen a city, a shining, majestic city the color of sunlit amber. It had not been one of the pseudo-medieval walled cities that dotted the sim world, the game territory known as the Middle Country. This vision had been alien, but relentlessly modern, a metropolis with elaborately decorated buildings as tall as anything in Hong Kong or Tokyo-Yokohama. But it was more than some science fiction vision. There had been something real about the place, more real than anything he had ever seen on the net. Set against the careful fractals of the game world, it had glowed with its own splendid and superior presence, like a gemstone on a pile of dust. Morpher, Dieter Cabo, Duke Slowleft, how could any of Orlando's rivals have brought something like that into the Middle Country? Every spell point in the world wouldn't allow you to alter the basics of a sim place that way. The city had simply belonged to a level of reality higher than the game he had been playing. Higher, even, it had almost seemed, than real life itself. That amazing city. It had to be a real place, or at least something other than net stuff. Orlando had spent his whole life on the net, knew it like a 19th century Mississippi pilot knew the big river. This was something new, an entirely different order of experience. Something was trying to communicate with him. No wonder the Lich had been able to sneak up on him. Pithlet must have thought his companion had gone mad. Orlando frowned. He would have to call Fredericks and explain, but he wasn't quite ready to rehash things with Fredericks yet. There was too much more. There was too much to think about. Thargor, Orlando Gardner's alter ego, his more-than-self, was dead. And that was only one of his problems. What was a 14-year-old kid supposed to do after he'd been touched by the gods? Chapter 5, A World of Fire. We're not going to finish this chapter, so I'm not even going to try, but I'm going to just get into it somewhere till we get to a good stopping point. Chapter 5, A World of Fire. Netfeed News. Stuttgart Protest Memorial. Visual, parade of people bearing candles. VO, voiceover. Thousands gathered in Stuttgart for a candlelight vigil to honor the 23 homeless people slain by German federal police in a riot over housing. Visual, young man in tears, head bloodied. Witness, they had body armor, big spikes sticking out. They just kept coming and coming. Using a flat screen drove Rini crazy. It was like boiling water over an open flame to wash clothes. Only in a miserable backwater hospital like this. She cursed and pushed on the screen again. This time it shot right past the S's and into the T's before she could arrest the scroll's progress. It shouldn't be this hard to get information. It was cruel, as if the bloody quarantine wasn't hindrance enough. Bukavu 4 information posters were everywhere in Pinetown these days, but most of them had been so densely covered with graffiti that she had never quite absorbed the content. She knew there had been outbreaks of the virus in Durban, and had even heard a pair of women talking about someone's daughter in Pinetown who had died of it after traveling in Central Africa. But Rini would never have guessed that the entire Durban outskirt medical facility would be under official UN-mandated Bukavu outbreak quarantine procedures. If the disease is so damn dangerous, she thought, then what are they doing bringing sick people here who don't have it? She was furious to think that her brother, already struck down by some unknown illness, might be exposed to an even worse contagion in the place she had brought him for treatment. But even as she raged, she knew the reasons. She worked for a public institution herself. Funds were short. Funds were always short. If they could afford a hospital just to deal with Bukavu patients, they'd have one. The hospital administrators couldn't be very happy about trying to keep their normal operation running under quarantine restraints. Perhaps there was even a very thin silver lining. Durban still didn't have enough B4 cases to warrant devoting an entire hospital to their care. That was small solace, though. Rini finally got the ancient interface to stop on the S's, and she punched in her visitor code. Sulaweo, Stephen, was listed as unchanged, which meant that she could visit him at least. But seeing Stephen these days was always heartbreakingly short of anything she would have called a visit. A nurse reading from a pad briefed her as she struggled into an N suit, although there was little he could tell Rini that she had not gleaned from the single word on the monitor in the waiting room. She had become so familiar with the litany she could have recited it herself, so she let the nurse go when he had finished, despite the urge to hang on to any symbol of officialdom and beg for answers. Rini knew by now that there were no answers. No detectable viruses, including, thank God, no signs of the fatal disease that had forced the hospital into such heavy-handed security. No blood clots or other blockages, no trauma to the brain, nothing. Just a little brother who hadn't awakened for 22 days. She shuffled along the passageway, holding her air hose to keep it from catching on things. Groups of doctors and nurses and possibly other visitors as well, since everyone looked pretty much the same in an N suit, hurried past her, making the same crackling and hissing noises she made. It was a little like being in an old news video about manned space exploration. When she passed a large window, she almost expected to look out and see the star-flocked depths of space beyond, or perhaps the rings of Saturn. Instead, it was only another ward full of tented beds, another campground of the living dead. Rini was stopped twice on her way to the 4th floor and asked to produce her visitor's pass. Although both functionaries spent a long time examining the faint lettering, the effects of a dying printer exacerbated by Perspex face shields on the N suits, she was not angered by the delay. In a way, she found it vaguely reassuring to know that the hospital really did care about the security of their quarantine. Stephen had been stricken so quickly and thoroughly and so mysteriously that it almost seemed like an act of malice. Rini was frightened for her baby brother, frightened of something she could not explain. She was relieved to see that people were on guard. Rini desperately wanted her brother to get better, but she was even more afraid of a turn for the worse. When she found him lying in exactly the same position as the day before, and all the monitors still locked on readings that were now as familiar as her own address, she felt both unhappiness and relief. Oh, God, my poor little man. He was so small in that big bed. How could a little tearaway like Stephen be so quiet, so still? And how could she, who had fed him, protected him, tucked him in at night, had in all ways except biology been a mother to him, how could she be so maddeningly unable to do anything for him now? It was not possible, but it was true. She sat beside his bed and put her own gloved hand into the larger glove built into the side of the tent. She carefully maneuvered her fingers past the tangle of sensor wires radiating from his scalp, then stroked his face, the familiar and beloved line of his rounded forehead, his upturned nose. She was heartsick at being so completely separated from him. It was like trying to touch someone in VR. They might as well be meeting in the inner district. A kindling of memory was interrupted by a movement at the doorway. Despite her own end suit, she jumped at the white apparition. "Sorry to startle you, Miss Sulaweo." "Oh, it's you. Any change?" Dr. Chandar leaned forward and surveyed the monitor dials, but even Rini knew there was no information to be had there. "Much the same, it seems. I am sorry." Rini shrugged, a resigned gesture belied by the heaviness in her gut, the warm imminence of tears. But crying was useless. All she would do was fog the faceplate. "Why can't anyone tell me what's wrong?" The doctor shook her head, or at least moved the hood of her ensuit from side to side. "You're an educated woman, Ms. Sulaweo. Sometimes medical science does not have answers, only guesses. At the moment, our guesses are not very good, but things may change. At least your brother's condition is stable." "Stable? So is a potted plant?" Now the tears did come. She turned to face Stephen again, although at the moment she could see nothing. A gloved, inhuman hand touched her shoulder. "I am sorry. We are doing all we can." "What is that, exactly?" Rini struggled to keep her voice steady, but she could not help sniffling. How is a person supposed to blow her nose at one of these bloody suits? "Please tell me, what are you doing, besides putting him in the sun and keeping him watered?" "Your brother's case is rare but not unique." Dr. Chandar's voice was pitched in the telltale dealing with difficult family members mode. "There have been and are other children who have fallen into this sort of comatose state without apparent cause. Some of them have spontaneously recovered, just woke up one day and asked for something to drink or eat. And the others, the ones who didn't just sit up and demand ice cream." The doctor removed her hand from Rini's shoulder. "We are doing our best, Ms. Sulaweo. And there is nothing you can do except what you are doing. Coming here so that Stephen can feel your touch and hear your familiar voice. I know, you told me, which means I should be talking to Stephen instead of haranguing you." Rini took a shaky breath. The tears had stopped flowing, but her faceplate was still steamy. "I don't mean to take it out on you, Doctor. I know you've got a lot to worry about. This has not been a particularly good time these past few months. I wonder sometimes why I picked a career with so much sadness in it." Dr. Chandar turned at the doorway. "But it is good to make a difference, and sometimes I do. And sometimes, Ms. Sulaweo, there are wonderful moments of happiness. I hope you and I can share one of those when Stephen comes back to us." Rini watched the dim white form shuffle out into the corridor. The door slid closed again. The maddening thing was, although she was aching for someone to fight with, for someone to accuse, there was no one. The doctors were doing their best. The hospital, despite its limitations, had given Stephen almost every test that might help explain what had struck him down. None had. There were no answers. There was truly no one to blame. "Except God," she thought. "Perhaps. But that had never done anyone much good. And perhaps long Joseph Sulaweo was not entirely without responsibility in the matter either." Rini touched Stephen's face again. She hoped that somewhere deep inside that unresponsive body he could feel and hear her, even through 2 layers of quarantine. I have a book, Stephen. Not one of my favorites this time, but one of yours? She smiled sadly. She was always trying to get him to read African things, stories, history, folk tales from the mixed tribal legacy of their family. She wanted him to be proud of his heritage in a world where such holdovers were fast disappearing, crushed in the inexorable glacial flow of first world culture. But Stephen's tastes had never run that way. She thumbed on her pad, then increased the size of the text so she could see it through brimming eyes. She blanked the pictures. She didn't want to see them, and Stephen couldn't. It's Net Surfer Detectives, she said, and began to read. Malibu Hyperblock is completely sealed, shouted Masker as he crashed through the door, letting his skimboard zoom off into the other room with none of his usual care. The Zingray 220 knocked several other boards loose as it tried to fit itself back into the rack. Masker ignored the clatter, more concerned with his news. They've got Big Mama recognizers on every flow point. That's some vicious bad wonton, said Scoop. He left his hollow-striped pad floating in midair as he turned to his excited friend. I mean, there must be major trouble. Double sampled. And there, at the end of that small excerpt from the doubtless striking literary masterpiece, Net Surfer Detectives, we will wrap it for the night. I will be back 7 p.m. Tonight, since it is now 2 a.m. today. I'll be back at 7 p.m. to continue reading. And I hope that you will all, those of you who can, time-wise, will join me. Excuse me, those of you who can't, as mentioned before, Chris Fab, or Fab, since I think you're from Germany, right, Chris? Yeah. But anyway, since Chris is putting it up on YouTube, and you can find it under his YouTube channel, he's put up just about all of them. So certainly you can always catch up there, anything you've missed if you wanted to. I also have access to them on my social media pages, both pages on Facebook and Twitter. And if you can't make it, though, however, that's fine too. And I will be back next Sunday at 1 a.m. again for those of you, particularly of the overseas persuasion. Overseas from me and me overseas from you. And with that, I'm trying to think of anything else I wanted to say. No, just the usual. Just the usual, guys. We're fighting our way through the variants, and we're fighting our way through the racist monstrosities, and we're fighting our way through, the people who are trying to strip away basic rights from everybody, simply because they can and whatnot. But we will prevail in the long run. We will prevail. And people who treat each other well will eventually be in charge. That is my firm. It may take a while. It may certainly not happen in any of our lifetime. But, at a certain point in the near future, that humanity will realize that we can't afford, nationalism, racism, anything that makes us think of one group of people as less than another group of people. Homophobia, transphobia, all of that stuff. It's a sickness. It's a carryover from the earliest days of our species, when anybody new on your territory had to be regarded with suspicion because they might kill you and eat you. Ain't true anymore, folks. But anyway, I digress, and I don't want to digress. I want to let you all go back to whatever you're going to do today. So I thank you for joining me, and I wish you all the best. Take good care of yourselves. Take good care of your loved ones, your friends, and neighbors. And I will see you in a few hours now. So peace and good wishes to you all.